Are we live?
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome of this Listen, Learn, and Reflect event. Islam reached America in the hearts of African slaves with the very first settlers. The rights that we enjoy today in our social, communal, professional lives is in a major part due to the civil rights movement of the 60s, which, as we all know, was led by Black Americans. Both of these are a huge debt that we owe to our Black brothers and sisters. Moreover, and specifically our Black Muslim brothers and sisters. Yet, here we are, continuing our talk on racism within our community. Now, I'm going to reiterate what I said last week or 2 weeks ago rather, in part 1, because it's important that we stop hiding behind this narrative. Islam did not end racism 1400 years ago, but instead Islam gave us the tools for us to end racism. And for that reason, we are gathered here today to hear from our respected scholars and our imams on where we stand and to learn how we can do better. We're excited to have Imam Khalil, Imam Daud, Brother Zachary King, and Sister Sarah Booth on our panel today. Our moderator tonight needs an introduction. A criminal defense attorney by profession, he is also on the board for Council for Islamic American Relations, New York chapter. He is the former board member of Falah Center and is currently the youth director of Falah Sunday School. Brother Hassan Ahmad. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Hassan.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Mahdee, Imam is on.
Jazakallah.
Khalil is on.
Jazakallah, Sister Mavish. Thank you for those kind words and that introduction. Thank you also to all the organizers who put this event together, including the board of directors of Falah. All of you are doing a great job. It's an honor to be part of this program, and it's a privilege to be the moderator as we have an amazing panel today. And I'm excited to learn from them, to listen to them, and reflect on what they have to say. And I was thinking about how to transition over to the panel today, and I was just thinking about all the things that I've been listening to about these topics. And one particularly I just wanted to put out there for food for thought for all of you who are listening today. You know, we've heard these words, "I can't breathe," all over the news. And as Muslims growing up, we've heard this before from one of the companions of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Bilal radiallahu anhu. And when he uttered those words, there was a rock being placed on top of him by an oppressor. And this thought is not my own, so I have to credit it to a combination of Imam Zaid Shaker, Sheikh Mendez, you know, who I heard this from, but I wanted to share it so we could all think about it. You know, as you all know also, while that rock was on Bilal, there was another companion, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who was helping Bilal, who actually had purchased his freedom. And what was said is that all of us are one of three people. Either we are Bilal radiallahu anhu and we are being oppressed, or we are Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, helping those who are oppressed. And the third category is actually the oppressor who's doing the oppressing. So it's something really to think about, and make sure, may Allah protect us all and help us all, inshallah, to be the best that we can be. With that thought, I wanted to go straight to our esteemed panel. And first, we're going to be starting out with Imam Khalil Abdul-Aziz. He was born and raised in New Jersey. He earned his bachelor's degree in business administration from Bloomfield College. He went on to study at NYU in Manhattan at the School of Counselor Education, leading to a master's degree. Imam Khalil is a veteran of the armed forces. He specifically enlisted in the United States Air Force. Imam Khalil moved to Saginaw, Michigan after his time in the military, where he joined the Nation of Islam, and he studied Arabic under Ustad Abdul Maneem Shakir at Wayne County Community College. And he also served as an imam in Saginaw at Masjid Abdul Rahman. Alhamdulillah, in 1984, he came home to New Jersey, and he currently resides in Plainfield. He's the resident imam at Masjidullah in Plainfield, and he's also the president of the Majlis Ashura in Plainfield. So Imam Khalil, thank you so much for being here. Just on a personal note, I was in Plainfield a few days ago for a rally for social justice that happened there. And it was a very touching moment. Like in the beginning of the rally, a brother had recited Surat al-Fatiha, and everybody was quiet, and there was hundreds of people there to bless the rally. So alhamdulillah. Imam, it's all yours. Please begin.
Okay, shukran, dear brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. I bear witness, I give open testimony that nothing is worthy of worship, nothing is worthy of praise, and that nothing is worthy of a complete, sincere, and total devotion except Allah, our Creator. And I openly bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant, his messenger, and the seal of the prophets. May the peace and blessings of Allah forever be upon Prophet Muhammad, upon his companions, upon his descendants, upon the righteous servants, all of them, and upon us here in America and throughout the world. Ameen. First of all, I would like to thank the Falah Center for this kind invitation to have us participate in this evening's program. We thank Allah for the opportunity to share with you what we are able to share, and we pray Allah that we will mutually learn from each other. I just want to begin by saying that I actually accepted al-Islam at the age of 26 years old. And at that time, I'd been married about 2 years, and we were searching. And I guess what I'd like for you to know is that I was raised in the church. I was born in Jersey City, as our brother indicated, and I was fully a church member. I was one of the acolytes who used to take and put the candles, light the candles and put them out in the church. And I grew up in a church environment. And part of what I want to say this evening is it has to do with the imagery and what we saw growing up in the church. Many of our Muslim brothers and sisters perhaps may never have even been inside of a church. But I do want to spend some time in talking about the imagery, because I remember it from when I was a very young child, probably 4, 5, 6 years old. And during that period of time, I would faithfully attend church with my parents, and I just grew up and absorbed the whole church experience. It wasn't until a little bit later on when I began asking some questions, and the questions were never quite fulfilling to me. And at that point, I guess I was approaching being a teenager, and I guess what happened was I just started looking in other directions. And between the time that I began that search and when I actually became a Muslim was probably about 10 years. So I looked around for a lot of different things. I read some books on Buddhism. I read some books on Zen. I read quite a number of things. I had a cousin who actually introduced me to a lot of books. And nothing ever actually took root in me during that period of time. And as we fast forward the whole experience, I remember just being a plain guy that just hung out and did things with my friends. And I had one friend in particular who I was very close with. It was what we would call, we were running buddies, okay? That's somebody who you just did everything with, who you experienced things with. And what happened was when I went into the Air Force, and this is later, we're fast forwarding things, I heard from other friends that this brother had become a Muslim. Now, this was my tight brother, my tight partner. And when I got home on leave, one of the first things I wanted to do was I wanted to go and see him and hang out like we used to. And when I got home, to my surprise, he was a completely changed brother. And I'm talking about the time of what we refer to as the first resurrection. And the first resurrection was the time during the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now, at that particular time, I came home expecting one thing, but this change was so drastic in this brother who I really respected that I had to take a look and see what he was doing. I mean, his skin was clear, his eyes were clear. He talked better and more intelligently than I had ever known him to talk. I mean, he seemed to, as we say, have his head screwed on right. And that was from him just being in the Nation of Islam for a short period of time. So, as it were, when I got out of the service, I joined the Nation of Islam primarily because of what I saw in him. I liked what I saw. It was something that I felt we could build on. So I joined the Nation of Islam. And 1 year later was when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad returned to Allah. And his son took over the leadership of the nation, Imam Warithuddin Muhammad. During that time, we were in a period of what we call a period of wudu. Imam Muhammad said that we were not taught prayer by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That was a period of wudu. And he said, that is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he said that the one coming after him would guide us into the true religion. So basically, that is what brought me, or the type of experience that brought me, as well as many other Muslims who I met and talked to later on, what brought us into the deen. We saw somebody who actually made the change in front of our eyes. And we followed suit. We liked that clean look. We liked the discipline. We liked the fact that they didn't drink. They didn't smoke. They didn't curse. They didn't do all of those things. And that was something that most of us just embraced. So that particular experience for me, and I'm saying that to say, what actually got me was the change that I saw in somebody who at that time took time to spend time with me. and began to teach me some things. So as we move forward, and Imam Warithuddin Muhammad came into the leadership, he spent a lot of time talking to us. We would go to meetings, and he would talk to us for 4 hours at a time, and we would never get tired. We would never get tired of listening to our leader, and he just opened up so many things to us that process of learning just continued and continued. And what was happening was he was leading us right into the Quran. He was leading us right where we needed to go, right where we wanted to be, right where we needed to be. And so we thank Allah for blessing us with leadership like that, and leadership in which he actually led by example. And we became what we know now as Sunni Muslims. And at that time, in 1975, the whole community of the Nation of Islam took their Shahada and became Muslims. And it's estimated that about 2 million of us were involved in the nation, and probably 1.5 million or so actually took their Shahada and followed that lead. So as we continued, Imam Muhammad began to give us concepts. And one of the concepts that he gave us was that man means mind. And man meaning mind is a concept that we had never thought about before. At least I never thought about it before, because I always thought man was determined by a brute strength type of being. In other words, he has certain muscles. He has certain things. Nobody messed with him. To me, that was a man. But Imam Muhammad, in saying that man means mind, he was pointing out to us the various things that Allah blessed us with, and that he is the one who gave us this aqil, this brain, this mind to think with. And now the man is able to outswim the fish. The fish is the best swimmer in the ocean, but man can outswim the fish because he is able to use his mind to produce a submarine. The man is able to outfly the bird because he is able to use his mind to create an airplane, and then jet planes, and then rockets, etc. So we find that even though man isn't able to fly physically, it's through his brain, man meaning mind, that he is able to do all of these things. Imam Muhammad talked about the race situation. And one of the things that he did was he began what we know as the CRAID Committee. CRAID was an acronym, C-R-A-I-D, and it means the Committee for the Removal of All Images of Divine. The Committee for the Removal of All Images of Divine. And when you think about it, Abraham, alayhi salatu wasalam, he broke up the images back during that time, during his time, and he blazed the way for others coming after him. He broke up the images, and he drew upon himself the wrath of his people, and he was able to endear himself to Almighty Allah. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he began his prophethood, the Kaaba, according to what we've learned, had 365 different gods or created things built by the hands of men, craftsmen. Abraham's father was one of them back in his time. But Prophet Muhammad and Abraham, they had two things that they did. They got rid of the images. And we began to understand that everything that we came up under in the church was an image. And that's something that I never actually perceived at that time. And what did he mean? What was he trying to tell us? I remember from my young days as being a member of the church that there was always this big picture of Jesus right in front of us. And we would walk by and we would have to bow to it. We would bow and then go over to the other side. We wouldn't pass that picture unless we bowed to it. And this was all part of the protocol for the church we belonged to. And what happened was we were never conscious that, well, this is a picture of a European. This is a picture of a Caucasian. And that is the picture of what we had learned at that time was the Son of God. And in explaining racial circumstances to us, the Imam began to explain to us how that picture is what was actually holding us back, because we were worshiping a picture of someone who had been our former slave masters. And so this Crade committee was created to take away the images from the people, the same way the prophet was removing the images because of the potential damage that they could do. And we began to see that this is something that we need to do also, because that image of Christ being a Caucasian is something that has a different effect on different people depending on who is sitting in front of them. And then he said, ask yourself, what is the effect on the mind of a young Black child who sits for years and years and having gone to the religious ceremonies, etc., with his parents and his grandparents and their parents? The Imam asked us, what is the effect on their mind? And then he said, now on the other hand, take a Caucasian child. What is the effect that has on their mind, learning in the church that this is the Son of God, astaghfirullah, and that this Son of God looks exactly like them, and he looks exactly unlike the other child. What is the effect on their minds? And we come to find out that there's a ripple effect that continues to take place once a person internalizes the symbolism in that symbol. The Caucasian, he feels that he is closer to God, and even in his family, the Son of God. And the implication is that anything other than him is ungodly. And if you look at the way this movement of peoples has gone through history and come over to us, particularly in America, in the slave trade, you can see that this internalization of Allah or God, as they were putting it, this interpretation of him being the Son of God means that the Caucasian race is closer and in kinship with God, while all others are in lesser categories, particularly the Africans. So Imam Muhammad began this Crade movement, C-R-A-I-D. And our job was to remove all racial images of divine. And what we did was we organized and we went church to church. At that time, I was in Saginaw, Michigan, fresh out of the Air Force. And we went church to church, and we would go in as visitors, but we would find out whether or not they had this image in their church. And if they had a Caucasian image in their church, and particularly in African-American churches, that Caucasian image, we would make note of it, and we would then visit the minister. We would visit the minister and tell him about our concern as far as that being a racial image, and that it portrayed the wrong message to whites and Blacks, and that imagery should be taken out of religion and we demanded that they took them down or removed them. Some did, some didn't. Some said they didn't even see the problem because it's not really God anyway. Especially the Caucasians, they would say it doesn't really make any difference. It's just a man, you know. And then we would ask them, well, if it doesn't make any difference, let's get a black one and put up there. I mean, if it's equal as you're saying, it doesn't make any difference. Let's take that one you have in there and put a black one down. And we didn't get a single preacher to go for that. Okay, black or white. And that shows you what if it and that shows you that it did mean something, even though they said it didn't. We began to do that, and we must have picketed outside of approximately, it was somewhere around 10 churches, and the word started getting out. And a lot of the people in the streets, they understood what we were doing and they were agreeing. And the ministers, they were actually getting upset because one minister had actually told me that what you're doing, he said, is messing with a brother's bread and butter. And I kind of laughed a little bit, you know, but what he was saying is that you're fooling with the money circulating through this situation. But at any rate, I'm saying this to say that there's a very, very serious problem that still needs to be addressed. And it's prevalent in the churches even now. And this CRADE committee, Imam Muhammad told us not to do that anymore at a particular point. And the reason was we thought that it was creating too much anxiety in order for us to actually make the kind of progress we wanted to make. And so we stopped picketing, but that never left us. That idea never left us. And I say all that to say, and I think my time is almost up. I say all that to say that when this man, George, was murdered, we saw an outburst of common people in the community and of all races because of the inhumanity that was shown to that brother. If it had been a dog or an animal that policeman was leaning on like that, somebody would have intervened, but he didn't. And the question comes up, what has happened to the mind of this person in order for him to treat another human being like that? And I think that it goes back centuries and centuries and centuries to one people believing that they have the right, the God-given right, to reign over other people with the permission of Almighty God. And I think that that can go back to what we learned in the church early on. So that being said, I think it was
Alhamdulillah.
20 minutes, but
Imam,
Allah.
That was truly fascinating. Thank you so much for raising such a salient point. Inshallah, I look forward to the question and answer session so we can talk further about this issue, inshallah.
Yes, sir.
Inshallah.
Okay. And I apologize for going a little over, but I think I started a little late.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all, Imam. Thank you so much. So, alhamdulillah, that reminds me of something I forgot. The format for today's forum is going to be one of a question and answer session at the end. So please, if you have questions, feel free to write your questions and ask your questions in the YouTube chat feature. So that way we are monitoring those, and inshallah we can ask those questions to our speakers at the end of the event, inshallah. So our next speaker, inshallah, is really an amazing speaker, and I'm so excited to hear from her. It's going to be Sister Sarai Ruth. She is an author, she's a poet, and she's a producer and founder of Taqwa Tales. And it's just great for our community to get exposed to this. I think we're all going to really enjoy it. Sister Sarai, if you're there, could you please just tell us a little bit about Taqwa Tales and what you're doing, and hopefully you can share some of your work with us as well. Sister Sarai, please go ahead.
Can you see me currently? Okay.
Yes.
MashaAllah. Okay, great. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Sarai Ruth, as Brother Hassan said. I'd like to begin by thanking Brother Hassan and Brother Zachary for inviting me to be a part of this event tonight. So I created Taqwa Tales, and what Taqwa Tales is, currently it's a YouTube channel where I'm sharing songs, rhymes, and poetry for Muslim children. And I plan on extending that to a stories podcast where I'm sharing adapted folk tales for Muslim children as well. And today I will be sharing a short story / poem that I created because one of the things that I've wanted to do through Taqwa Tales is to address some of the issues that we have, not only in society, but also that can sometimes be very nuanced and sometimes go under the radar in our own community as Muslims, and that we need to be open and upfront about talking about that. And I wanted to be able to also make it easy for people to talk to their children about certain topics that are very, very important in our faith. So I did want to say, if you have any children nearby, please invite them to join, because this story is geared toward our youth, inshallah. So I'll give just like a moment, like 10 seconds for that. All right, so Bismillah. This poem story is called Brother White and Brother Black. Brother White and Brother Black bickered on for many moons, trying to gather who was best by looking at their hues. Brother White said, "It is I, with skin like natural silk. Surely the Lord does love the one whose skin he made like milk." Brother Black said, "It is I, a precious earthly sight. Surely the Lord does love the one whose skin he made like night." And so it went on, and evenings without rest, arguing about whose color made them of the best. And finally, after days when neither won the fight, they visited a learned man to weigh in on their plight. "O learned one," said Brother Black, "does not the Lord of all love me more, when he made me dark like the higher skies, the fig, the date, the fertile soil, dark like heavy boulders from which water springs forth, dark like mighty iron forged for duty and for work? Surely these things he mentions with great reverence in his speech, proving through creation that his love is more for me." "But learned one," said Brother White, "look at me and think of the pale moon and stars, of Jannah's blessed drink, of a place beyond the world where rivers look like me, of the clouds like gentle mountains, and of daybreak's majesty. Surely all of these things point me to my station, that I and no other are more beloved among the Lord's creation." The learned one listened patiently and lifted his head to start. "It is not about light or dark, my friends, but what is in the heart. Are you racing for his pleasure? Do you obey his command? Do you follow his beloved and the guidance of Quran? Do you pray? Do you dhikr, seeking each day your spirits fill? Do you call upon Allah when in chaos and when the world is still? Are you kind? Are you giving? Do you do your best of deeds? When you see the one downtrodden, do you try to meet his needs? Do you stand for love and justice? Do you stand for hope and peace? Do you stand for those who cannot stand and those who cannot speak? You see, the heart most beloved to him is the heart that is drawn nearer. There is no station that comes from what you find by looking in a mirror. So if you compete for God's love, look not at your skin, but the Iman inside your heart and how it shows upon your limbs. And with that, the men dispersed to go and find their spirits fill, to purify their hearts and cleanse them of every ill, through prayer and remembrance, through service and good deeds, through walking gently on the earth and planting fruitful seeds. They sought their Lord in truth, with love inside their breast, striving with everything they had to be the one that he loved best. And over this love they sought, sometimes you'd find them in a spat, and the learned one would smile and say, much better this than that. MashaAllah. So that is the end of that piece. Inshallah, you can glean something from it. That piece can also be found on my YouTube channel if you want to listen to it again, or if you want to share it with your family and friends or your community. Again, thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Wow, that was amazing. I can't wait to have my boys listen in to the YouTube channel and see your amazing work. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really good. Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, jazakallah. Okay, so next we will be hearing from Zachary King. Zachary's he's a social worker. He has a master's degree in social work. He's a licensed social worker and also born and raised in New Jersey. He majored in nutrition at Rutgers University. Since graduating from Rutgers, he's become a teacher, received his master's degree in social work, and worked in the public school system. Mr. King continues to work in various school systems in the Essex County area, as well as provides in-home intensive community counseling for young men. He's wholeheartedly dedicated to urban education and community uplift. Islamically, he's also proficient in recitation of Quran and singing. But here's a quote from him that I wanted to say to you guys to sort of before we hear from him, because it is amazing. The dream is to employ everything about me, what I was once ashamed of, loved, struggled to place and covet, to transform the soul and liberate humanity. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Zachary King. Go ahead, Zachary.
Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Jazakallah, I'm just honored to be here and honored to hear from the prior luminaries. I just was really reflecting on what the Imam was saying prior about the impact of images and then the sharing of that poem. It just, alhamdulillah, I just feel blessed to be in the room. So that said, I wanted to say for myself, I definitely have to admit that there was a desire on my part to be able to come in this conversation, to drop some type of gems, maybe even speak a poem that would be at the level that our sister Sarai had, and kind of like smoothly exit this conversation. And I realized that when I was thinking about having this conversation and being part of this conversation, I was struggling. I mean, our brother Hassan could admit that I called him and I was like, okay, let's just be clear about what we're talking about. And when I think about that, I really think about the reality of how this conversation does have a level of complexity. It's not something that's smooth. It's not something that's easy. I mean, let's just think about a couple examples. To be a great teacher, right, is to be somebody who experiences the bumps, to experience and expose your humanity, to be able to be accessible and to struggle with your students, take their feedback, and then come to a level to build that craft to be a great teacher, to be somebody who's a student, right? It requires a struggle. The best example was said so many times in Ramadan about our beloved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with the struggle in the transmission of the Quran, right? And that outward process shows, you know, like how in the expansion of a human being, there's a struggle. It's not always smooth. And then something that maybe everybody can relate to, love. And so some people may be thinking about a spouse, but I'm thinking family, also friends, or even a craft, being on a team with a friend. It's not always pretty. People make fun of you. People don't understand where you're coming from. So struggle is at the heart of expansion. And so I enter this conversation wholeheartedly and humbly understanding that it's not an easy conversation for people to have. Number one, to enter into to receive the information, and for people who are delivering it to be able to deliver it in a way where they always feel like they'll be heard. So with that, I would like all of us to take a moment and really just adjust our intentions, right? That our intention in part is going to be to step beyond the popularized and cursory efforts that exist. Just because we've started to have this conversation at this point in time, it doesn't mean that there weren't many other Black bodies that were lost and that oppression just started and that there was a need to have a conversation just now. And let's actually situate it inside of an intention that's for Allah and step inside a space where our anger, our frustration, and what we're seeking to love and embody is something that's going to please Allah. And lastly, let's really be clear that this type of striving is what we were created for inside of our vice regency. There's a quote that's actually in popular culture that comes from what was said by the lawyer, right, in the movie Just Mercy. So I'm going to quote it for you. He says, and this actually, when you hear it, you'll start hearing our messenger, right? He says, through this work, right, when he's in the setting, in the hearing on the death penalty, he says, through this work, I've learned that each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. The opposite of poverty isn't wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. The character of our nation isn't reflected on how we treat the rich and the privileged, but how we treat the poor, the disfavored, and the condemned. I mean, does not that reflect the ideals of this religion and what our beloved used to encourage us towards? Does that not also help us think when we talk about this discussion and we enter into it, that we're really speaking about our neighbor, and that is central to not only just being Muslim, to actually being at a higher level of being called a believer. And then the last thing is I'm going to be encouraging as we speak near the end is about excellence, or ihsan, which is a central part of the religion as well. And I'm reflecting on a verse in Surah Al-Hadid, right, in Hadid, verse 16, where Allah says, in the translation or the understanding of that, has not the time come for the hearts of those who believe to be affected by Allah's reminders, right? And like it goes on and it completes. But the interesting part about that, like this, almost like this encouragement, it gives you a sense of that this level of ihsan or excellence is something that's very attainable. Not inside of just thinking about it from a scary perspective, but like, is it not time? As in, like when you have a martial arts teacher and he says, I think it's time for you to go to your next level for your belt test. It's not going to be an easy test, but they're saying something to you about what you may need to strive next for. Or your boss that says, you know what, you might want to try out for that position. You still have to go through the interview process and it might be hard, but it's something that you can do. Or a parent that says to their child, when are we going to have a grandkid? And that might not be something that's on your screen or on your thought, but it's something that they're encouraging you towards. So we need to consider inside of this where we need to strive and where we need to get to. So similar to the Imam who spoke earlier, I want to also say I'm speaking from a certain angle. I'm from praying folk. And for those who don't understand what that means, my parents were Southern Baptists. I grew up in a Christian family. I grew up in the suburbs, in a house. My mother was a teacher. My mother's mother was a teacher. In contrast, my dad finished high school, and his father had to drop out before he finished elementary school because he wasn't even accepted in the very house that his mother was. He actually had to sleep in the shed. With all that said, there was a lot of sacrifice made by my parents for me to be somebody who's God-fearing, to be somebody who was well knowledgeable in American society, who could be a citizen. And along that way, I was blessed to experience through school information in history class about Islam that by Allah's grace, I was able to make a lot of connections, could see the connections to Christianity, could see the contradictions with Christianity, and be able to make a choice and convert. And from that space is really, where I come from. In some ways, experiencing being in the house and my whole life as an African-American in a more, let's say, middle-class environment, working in places, in schools, in social work, in fields where there's not a lot of African-Americans and there's definitely not a lot of Black males. So I come with that experience, and also with the experience, of being in the Muslim community and being in at least one set of friends, like the only Black person or one of few Black people And when you're in the house of Pharaoh, or when you're in the house of people who have different views, you get a good chance to kind of see firsthand maybe some things that are missing, maybe some places where there are things that could be dangerous to the community or to your family. And I'm really going to be speaking from that perspective. So the first thing I would say, which I believe was articulated pretty well in the previous cast, and of which I would encourage people to watch if they didn't watch, is what I really want you to take away from the last cast, or where I'm picking up from, is that we are behind the 8 ball. And when I say that, being behind the 8 ball, a metaphor saying that we're behind with regards to this aspect or this topic that has to do with racism. One thing I'm extremely proud of, speaking about my conversion, is, in '96, when I finally, got up the gumption to put down the books I had been reading and take a step and go towards the mosque, and ask for the Imam, because that's what I read to do, right? I was very pleased that I didn't get the Imam. In fact, the Imam didn't speak English. However, the general people in the community were able to sit with me, answer my questions, and send me on my way. And that experience just helped me know the power of this religion. Now, if you think about the same idea as it has to do with some big stumbling blocks in America, we have to ask ourselves, or you should ask yourselves, like, where are we with regards to these big stumbling blocks? To review some of the things previously said, like in the prison system, 64% of the prison system being filled with Black and brown people in America, 2 times in both genders, right? Of Black people to white people. Medical Apartheid, an amazing book to read, to talk about, there's a lot of people in our community who are into medicine, but unaware of, in the backdrop, some of this knowledge that we have was acquired through how slaves were mistreated. And once they weren't useful anymore as far as working in the field, there was still someplace else they could be sent, and they could experiment and do the things that you don't need certain policies. You don't need those clearances that exist now when you do research. And that was done on our people so that we can have that knowledge. And still, the medical field is still swayed in how they treat people from our community, from birthing, what's told to Black women when they're giving birth, or how medicine is administered or not, based on stereotypical beliefs about Black women being able to sustain more punishment or more pain, like in all levels. For example, education, just a disparity that exists. When I go from where I work in Newark or in Irvington to where my children go to school at, it's just like day and night in experience. And with COVID having happened, just the gap is just continuing to get larger. And speaking of COVID, like how it was implemented, even in something as simple as how people were wearing masks, you have places where policemen were giving out masks literally to Euro-American or white citizens, and giving hard times to a woman who had a child in tow. And we're seeing this stuff on camera. These are things that are part of the reality of the stew, the water, the pool in which we all are in. And to be in a place where we're ignorant about these kind of things, we have to understand that's an extreme contrast from that general knowledge and that power that we have about aspects of faith and just basic ideas, right? But then we don't really have an understanding about the stumbling blocks, the things that really could take our community off course. And so that being said, I really want to ask and challenge everybody to really ask themselves, are we really free of this type of racism? So I'm going to read a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. when he was in the Birmingham jail. I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's about a 6-page typed article that exists, but he actually wrote it by hand. But in part of it, he says, first, I must confess that over the last years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. He goes on and says some other words there, but the most powerful part is at the end, where he says, of this section, he says, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So the thing that's really interesting that I find this to be apropos is the terms are definitely different. Some things have changed in this quote that he's speaking to. But we have to ask ourselves sometimes in our community as Muslims, are we more like that moderate in how we handle the things that we see happening in society, and we say things to our family, to our children, like that's not our business, or our behavior basically says that's not our business or our concern? Is that not like being a moderate? And I read this instead of maybe saying a quote that would be stronger and harder for people to swallow than from our beloved El Hajj Malik El Shabazz about his comparison of the house Negro versus the field Negro. So all that being said, we have to just continue to consider, like, are we really doing justice in our study and our awareness of the racism that exists in this country? I mean, if we think about the story of Moses, which is so popular, there wasn't like an experience that the general people in society in the time of Moses didn't know what was going on, and that Moses was inside of a plight of helping to free his people. But that the only times in which we as a community of Muslims have felt solidarity was actually almost like by force, which was when 9/11 happened, in which other groups in society started experiencing what Black people had been experiencing, Black Muslims had been experiencing inside the community and outside the community from before. And those are the type of things that we need to like really try to dismantle. So people, always want to get to the solution. So, where are the benefits? Okay, so what are you recommending, Zachary? So I would say, like, we really need to look at the low-hanging fruit that exists in the area of education. I'm definitely going to speak to, because it's an area that I've been in for a while, and in mentorship. So we need to consider have we really been sidelining in the conversation in the Muslim community. And I think it's really great that our sister Sarai was actually, right before this, because, Black women in general are the most educated group, as in they are the ones that are most graduating the most in American society. And therefore, by extension, like the Prophet ﷺ, those who are great before Islam are also great in Islam. So then we have a body of these converts that exist, of Black Muslim women, right, that have this knowledge, that have something to really provide inside of the conversation that has to do with racism, inside of general knowledge, and connecting with youth. And one of the areas that really needs to be addressed is, how can those individuals be included? How are we looking after them? How are we protecting them? And when we say protecting them, there's a lot of levels there, but the one I'm specifically speaking to is there's protection also in including them and in having them have a space, right? And that may take a deliberate action. Now that we're online, there's an experience that people have, but definitely outside of that, a lot of times, because of the way our communities are set up, there's not really a place, especially for Black women who are Muslim, who have children. But if you think about it in contrast, Black women are at the forefront of Black Lives Matter, of Muslim ARC. These are things that are actually addressing the very issues that actually plague the general society as well as the Muslim community. And so, like, there needs to be more efforts to make a connection, even across lines, that even if they're not from your masjid, how can they really be included? How can their knowledge, how could their presence, how could their wisdom actually be pulled into the conversation? The second thing I want to speak to is also about the youth. I mean, the youth are powerful because, number one, there's an immediate reward. We know that that's a group that often can be forgotten, can be oppressed, and that is our future. So there's already an impetus for us to be able to connect with them. But there's another thing, like, children are the ongoing Moseses in our households. They know the contradictions, they know the truths, and they can provide a feedback that could be very essential for us. So the thing that I think that is important is for you to know is, number one, in urban America, like Muslims, there's a lot of ways in which we need to connect more with that group. So in my experience of the past 3 years, there's been 4 Black individuals that have passed in the schools that I worked in, right, or been connected to. And of those, 50% of them were Black Muslims, right? It's just like there's a place where our own community needs to take care of itself. The other thing is that it's really central to connect with them, because they may give us feedback that actually could help us understand how to connect. We always say, like, we want to connect more with the Muslim youth. Like, their exact feedback could really be able to make that big difference. And I think that the other piece that's related to this that I wanted to say is like we have to really look to see how we can capitalize on that energy. You know, one of the things that I found to be most phenomenal about youth is that there's a place where they are inside of a YOLO. Like this isn't made up. Like they have less fear. They're like have the energy to stay up all night, and it'll go into gaming. It'll go into risk taking, and it's because they actually have less of those sensibilities and less fear. So the question is, how can we actually channel that? How can we actually connect with them and actually channel that towards something that's going to make the type of difference that previous movements used to make? Like those movements that existed that people point to with pride in the 70s, in the 60s, etc. A lot of that was done from the energy of youth and connecting with our Black youth that are Muslim and non-Muslim for that matter, when they have no fear, right? And they're just really in need of guidance, is going to really be central in moving forward the entire Muslim community in America. And then lastly, I just want to speak to the idea and coming back to like the upper level, which is ihsan, which in this case, I would say is like living inside of empathy, right? As in, you know, compassion is just a beginning place, right? You're concerned. But empathy is when you really put yourself and you almost feel or experience and carry what another person is really dealing with, right? So we understand that Islam wasn't spread by the sword, right? And we understand that it was based on character. But part of that character and how that looks here means that you would understand the character and composition of what's happening here, of which race is a central piece. And if we ourselves in our community don't address it, then we'll kind of continue to live far from that level of excellence. So one of the things I definitely would say that needs to be considered is, besides race, we also need to see how that converges with capitalism. And a book that I would definitely recommend that really gives you a connection between like race and to a degree capitalism is The History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. It just really kind of gives you a sense of the environment that we're in, and just understand that we're continuously living with different type of contradictions. The other thing I just want all of us to continue to consider is that we think of ourselves, or maybe you've looked at previous things that have happened in history. You've looked at times of slavery or in times of Jim Crow where people have been hung, and you wonder, like, how could those people just stand around and witness that? Maybe you've even talked to your children about scenes that we've seen more recently about what they would do, right? But we all need to consider, like, how can we get in front of that, right? It's important for us to talk to our children about those particular things and what their thoughts are, because that would be essential to addressing some avenues or issues of race. But the other piece is also considering how can we organically address it to get ahead of it, so we won't continue to be behind the 8 ball. And then in closing, I would say we need to consider like how we can work with the concept of certain actions that we would call fard ayn for ourselves, right? So fards that we need to take on for ourselves, such as I would say joining organizations that address race, right? Like Muslim Art. What like having a list of maybe movies or documentaries that we watch that's going to really bring up our knowledge. Taking a course, for example, there's a course for Bayan online where Dr. Sherman Jackson goes over some aspects of the Black community. It will elevate your level of appreciation and understanding of the Black community and its place in establishing Islam. I would say even simple things like when you make dua, I know people mention, there's places that we mentioned, there's a visceral effect, Palestine, right? There's already an effect. But do you pray for Black Africa? Do you pray for oppressed people in America? Do you even think about places like Haiti that the main issues are there or because of how they were able to liberate themselves? And then lastly, just continue to consider things that have been mentioned before about our volunteering, our support of the people in the prison system, and continuing to get feedback, like even if it's focus groups with young people, so we can understand how we can continue to address the issues that exist.
Zachary, thank you so much. You are an inspiration. It's so important for us to listen to these things, and this is part of reflecting for all of us. Myself, the first one, to think about how we can do better, and are we really doing better, and what we can do to continue to do better. So thank you for that. Thank you very much. Again, I just want to remind everybody who's listening, if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please feel free to in the chat feature, ask your question. And inshallah, the speakers have agreed to stick around and answer your questions at the end of the program. And that brings us to our final speaker today, and that is Imam Daud Haqq. We're very blessed to have him here, to listen to him, and thank you so much for coming, Imam. He's originally from Barbados. He received his Islamic background at the University of Medina, earning a diploma in the Arabic language. He's actively participated in many Islamic leadership seminars, including parenting skills for effective child development at the University of Bahamas and many other family and youth developmental programs. He's been an active imam, educator, and advisor in Muslim communities throughout the Caribbean. From 1988 to 1997, Imam Daud has volunteered at various universities: Cyril Potter's Teachers College in Guyana, University of West Indies in Barbados, the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute, the Boys Industrial School in the Bahamas. He's lectured on all sorts of subjects: comparative religion, comparative law, self-awareness, and human development. And Imam Haqq, he's currently resides in Newark, New Jersey. He's the Imam of the NIA Masjid and Community Center. He's the president of Muslim Outreach for Anti-Violence and an active member of numerous social groups, including the Tri-State Imams Council, the Newark Imams Council, Muslim Community Leadership Coalition, and he is an exceptionally well-known motivational speaker, especially in issues of family and marriage counseling. Imam, thank you so much for being here. It's all yours. Go ahead, Imam.
Thank you for having me, Brother Hassan. I want to first of all give praise and thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank him for his numerous favors and bounties for which he has showered us, and we should always give him thanks because he is worthy of all thanks and all praise. And so we submit ourselves to him and we seek his mercy and his forgiveness and his guidance. We also want to thank the Falah Center for inviting me to participate in the very interesting discussions that you've been having over these past couple of weeks, especially in the context of the situation as it exists. And so in this area of racial issues, or how to unite our Ummah, I think is important for us, and I'll probably speak more to that today. And basically, I want to look at it from the point of view of the immigrant Muslims and the native Muslims. That is, the Muslims, the local Muslims, or the native Muslims, their relationship and engagement. How to look at it, and what should be and what is, something along those lines. And so, by definition, the immigrant is the newcomer. He's the adoptive resident or citizen, whereas the native is the local homegrown resident citizen. And this is the situation that exists. What the question I want to raise, and that should be raised, is what should define the relationship or the rules of engagement between the two groups? The Quran answers this question for us, because as Muslims, we take our perspective always from the Quran. That is our basis on which we should all establish our lives and all affairs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and hold fast to the rope of Allah altogether, and be not divided among yourself. And this is important. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, do not divide it among yourself. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, and remember Allah's favor on you. إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً, when you were enemies. فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ, and then he united your hearts. فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا, and by his mercy and by his favor and his bounty, you became brothers. This is the basis. And from this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the lessons we take from this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanded us to hold fast to the Quran and the Sunnah as our basis. It is commanding us to be together and to forego division it is commanding us that if we do so, it's telling us that if we do so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring our hearts together, and that we would rather than being enemies, that we would, and strangers, we would become friends and brothers. And so this is the basis of brotherhood. And so the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will descend on us, and he will establish that solid brotherhood among us. This is what we should take from this. And this is the basis of it. This is how we should function. So there must therefore be positive interaction and interchange between the immigrant Muslims and the native Muslims. This is borne out, and this is established. We have the practical example for this in the Medinan society when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina. And so we had these two groups. There was the Muhajirin, which was the immigrant Muslims. And then there were the Ansar, which was the local Muslims. And with this, there were not just, between them, there was not just an interaction and interchange. There was a full integration of the two. The Prophet ﷺ ensured a full integration of the immigrant and the resident or local Muslim. And this was a serious effect. This caused a serious effect because this bringing the two groups together, it caused a synergism never witnessed before. This combining and mixing and fusing and assimilation that led to a synthesis of unity of the young nascent Muslim community and society in Medina, and release a phenomenal situation, right? This synergism never witnessed before, and it led to a phenomenal growth and spread of Islam, as though Islam erupted from Medina and spread over the known world. And we're still feeling the effects of that today because of that synergy. It is important that we understand this. If we want to learn and use from this time, we have to benefit from this. And so the essence of brotherhood, when based on Islam, it can bring about this. It brings about this when it's based on the brotherhood of the Muslim today is mostly, but when we look at ourselves, and where we are today, the brotherhood of Muslims today is mostly theoretical and superficial. And for some, they cannot even get past the idea of brotherhood in any practical sense. And for others, the idea is intriguing, but its full acceptance and application is still missing. And sure, yes, they all agree. All Muslims are brothers. We are brothers, but we do not see the kind of effect that should exist in terms of what brotherhood did, what the standard that was set in Medina that caused that synergy, that caused that energy, that caused Islam to grow in the manner that it did. Islam, if we look at bringing it back home and looking at Islam here in America, or in the Americas as a whole, this covers the North and South of America, of the Americas. When we look at in Islam, of Islam here, before the immigration rush of the 70s and 80s, Islam and Muslims were predominantly indigenous. They were primarily and predominantly indigenous Muslims. The face of Islam and Muslims in America at the time was that of the native. You had, for instance, we had the Nation of Islam, you had the Dawah al-Islam, you had the Deen Allahi, you had the Brotherhood, we had the Islamic Party, and so on. So many different Islamic groupings dotted across the Americas. And this is how it was. You had, for instance, the Muhammad Speaks, you had the Bilalian News, you had the Western Sunrise. This was the Muslim media at the time. So that the native Muslim at that time, early 70s and before, they controlled the Muslim agenda in America. After the immigration rush, however, not only did the control change hands, but the Muslim agenda itself changed. And the issues concerning the local Muslims moved from the front stage of the agenda to the back stage of the agenda. And so that when we look at it, I mean, most of those who migrated here to America, they didn't do so because of Islam, or because of being Muslims or so. Islam was, for the most part, was a byproduct of who they were and where they came from. And so the immigration not only changed the perception, but also the perspective of Islam and Muslims in this country. And it changed the reality. And so people begin to look at Muslims different. This is where you get this thing, go back. We will find Muslims, because Islam then looked foreign. Islam was presented almost as foreign because there was a separation between the immigrant Muslim who took over the Muslim agenda and the Muslim look, and the local Muslim who was I think this is basically what happened. And so Islam changed, because in the 60s or in the early 70s, you'll hear no one will tell you, you go back anywhere, go there. I mean, you're the one who brought us here. So where will we go? This is our land. Our people, the sweat and blood of our people built this land. So, and we took your religion and everything from you. You gave us everything that in this manner. So from this, this was the situation as it exists. And unfortunately, if we are to learn, we have to learn from the Medina experience. Because what has happened, yes, the Muslim immigrant became the majority. They became the face of Islam, and they not only took over, but they determined the agenda of Islam and Muslims, right? Without reference to those who are here. I mean, Brother Zachary, he mentioned some studies that is people need to do, or Muslims need to do, to understand the situation of African Muslims from this background who are the descendants of slaves who were forcibly bought here and sold into slavery. So the reality is that we need to look at this and understand it. Only in the Medina context that we can understand and really benefit from it. When we look at the Medina experience, the native or local Muslims laid the groundwork for the immigrant population. And I think the sister who mentioned first, who was here with us, she mentioned that the immigrant Muslim stands on the shoulders of the local Muslims. They have paved the way through the struggles that they had to go through and stuff. Because slavery didn't start in continental US. It started in the Caribbean. The European, the British and Europeans started the slavery in the Caribbean islands, where they grew the cotton and the cane and stuff like that. And they bought people from Africa and put them on the plantations to work. And then it was exported from the Caribbean into the Carolinas, and then from the Carolinas, it spread across the US. So there is a connection or a bond between the whole area. That's why I said Americas rather than just North America or South America. And so it is important to look at this model that the immigrant Muslims, you know, they recognize the host Muslim, they accepted them, they embraced them, and the host Muslims embraced the immigrant Muslims, and they built on it. They built on that connection to the point that Rasulullah actually built a brotherhood, practical, physical brotherhood, where this one was the brother of the other brother, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, look, you cannot inherit from one another. Only family, blood relatives can inherit. But that is the kind of connection. And we read these and we read with nostalgia about that brotherhood and how practical it was and how Bilal was connected and this and that. We go, but it's only nostalgic. We need to take the nostalgia, live the nostalgia, and apply it. And then we don't need to be as nostalgic anymore because we will be actually living it. We need to be living it. And so when this happened, the immigrants merged and integrated, they became part of the native of a local environment. So they were not seen as foreign. Islam is not foreign to America because we know that more than 30% of our people that was brought here for slavery, that 30% of them, they were Muslims. So Islam was here from way back. It's nothing new. All right. So this, we have to bring that back to the fore and help to understand this. And so by mixing and blending, this insulated the immigrant from bias or from prejudice from the wider society. They insulated and it protected them from the malice and ill intent of the rest of the population. So that the immigrant Muslims were engaging while the local Muslims were responsive. And this led to mutuality and reciprocity. There was cooperation and coordination, a combining of efforts, of common goals and objectives, and there were mutual rights and obligations and shared responsibilities and shared benefits. And there was such immunity for there was immunity for the immigrant and sensitivity for the native. And who benefited? Islam benefited from this. And so if we really want to grow, this is the direction that we need to do. And so this, when we do this, we're able to rid ourselves from prejudice, from bias and narrow-mindedness, from indifference and disdain, from animosity and malice, from tribalism and ethnicity, and harshness and extremism, all of which plague the Muslims. We see this plague the Muslims today. Whether we accept it or not, I mean, this is one of those taboo areas that the Muslim community has refused to discuss or to look at for many years, and is only in the context of what has happened that has forced us to talk about it. And so we need to, come out of our shell and talk about it openly, because only by dialoguing and discussing, and I commend the Falah Center for this, it's only by dialoguing that we're able to clear these things and bridge, build a bond as is important for us in terms of this. We're able to do what is right, because the coming together of the immigrant, which was the Muhajir, and the locals, which were the Ansar, gave ascendancy and power to Islam and to Muslims. And so the Muslim community could be much stronger if we could build these bridges, if we can come together, rather than these are immigrants, these are locals. And so, I mean, that degenerates into even nationalities, Egyptian Arabs and Indo-Pak and this and that. I mean, Islam set all these. Islam was the unique thing about Islam, that Islam was able to absorb peoples from all cultural backgrounds, all kinds of diversity that was in Islam. that we can find in Islam. Islam was able to absorb all of these different cultures and ethnicities, and was able to blend them and mix them together, that created that synergistic energy that put them together. And it did not efface those individual characteristics that identify them. It did not, because Islam does not encourage cultural suicide. But when we then want to put it over the other, then we are going away from what Islam says, because we're all on the same footing, right? Kullukum min Adam wa Adam min turab, as the Prophet says. All of you are from Adam. Adam's from the dust of the ground. He is from turab. So we have to always look at things in that broad context that Islam emphasized. And as our sister said in her piece, that it is not the color, it's not the ethnicity, it's not the color, it is the heart. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, the best of you is the one who is most conscious of his Lord. And so the relationship between the immigrant Muslim and the local Muslims, and here now we have, like, we already gone to the second generation, and the first generation is still there, maintained, but the second generation is beginning now to question, and because there was not enough mixing, there was not enough blending, there was not, because there were just separation, and still you can see separation between this and that. And so it is important that we try to build those bridges and build those gaps, because our brotherhood needs a serious tune-up. It needs a serious working on. We need to become more patient with each other. We need to be more tolerant of each other. We need to establish mutuality and rights and obligations, and our brotherhood need to hit the ground running, right? It needs to hit the ground running for our reality to change. So it's not just be in our heads as a thought or idea or lofty concept, but it be in our hearts, but it would be in our lives. It would be in our hearts, and it would be in our lives. So we need, between these two communities, two aspects of our community, the two branches, because there's only one Muslim community, but there's these branches in it that we need to mix a bit more. We need to work them together. We need to help them to understand and appreciate each other. Because one of the problems I believe that has happened is that most immigrant Muslims bought into the white narrative of Black people. They bought into that narrative. So that same negative idea which is the white narrative, there's negative towards, then it means that has influenced much of their thinking. We need to get away from that negative, sick thinking of that narrative, so that until we're able to find that synthesis, we'll remain fragmented and we are fractured. It would be, the immigrant community and the local community. I don't like that concept, Muhajirin and Ansar. But when we say Muhajirin and Ansar, there's this blend, is like a form that community. We need to be able to do that. We need to work, come up with ideas. We have a lot of social scientists like Zachary, and young, intelligent, educated social scientists like Brother Zachary, who was on earlier. We need to get all and so many other young second generation immigrant Muslims who are educated in the social sciences and stuff like that, how we can have serious discussion, because it is the next generation that has to take it. We are the old ones, we are going the other side, but they have to take it. You're the second generation, the next generation has to take Islam, but Hassan and your brothers, young brothers have to take the struggle and bring about that balance among us. And if we're able to do this, I can guarantee that Islam will become very powerful and strong in this country, because the Muslims will be together. we as one body, one community, we will feel the pain of each other. And as the Prophet ﷺ says, that the Muslim is the brother of another Muslim, and he always look out for him. He's safe, protected one another. May Allah make it easy for us and for us. And really thank for having me on the panel.
Imam Daud, thank you so much. It's great to hear these points from you, and your wisdom, inshallah, will guide us to do better, and inshallah to accomplish some of these goals moving forward. So we do have some questions that I wanted to ask you. I would ask the speakers to try your best to try to keep your answers within a couple of minutes, because we did want to try to close out at 10:30, 10:35. I have about 4 or 5 questions that I wanted to get out. So let me get right into it. The first one is for Imam Daud. The question for you is, you talked about this this divide between the host Muslims and the immigrant Muslims. The question it comes to, as far as the second generation is concerned, what are your thoughts about the second generation of both communities, or at least the immigrant community for sure? What are their, do you think they face the same challenges? Is there any difference there? Or what are your thoughts on that as far as the second generation of the immigrant communities?
The second generation of the immigrant community, they're in a better position to understand the local situation. They have grown up here, they're born here, they grew up here, they were educated here. And it is important for them, it is easier for them to build, to mend or build fences. It's easier for them because they can relate. What Brother Zachary mentioned of education is a fundamental thing. Education, educating the immigrant community to educate themselves on the local African community, African based community, that it is not, and don't buy into the narrative, the white narrative of them, because that narrative, that white narrative has its basis. It is there for to establish superiority of one group over the other. And so we should not buy into that, because it is the sweat and blood of our people who were brought to this area, to this part of the world, and it was their sweat and blood that built the country, and therefore they're part of the soil. They're part of the soil, and so the second generation, because they're educated, it is easier for them to sit and dialogue and come up with understanding how we can build the bridges, how we can connect it, how we can break down some of the walls that has been established before, because we have to break the walls down before we start building bridges. May Allah make it easy for us.
Alhamdulillah, thank you, Imam. The next question is for Imam Khalil. You talked about the campaign to remove the images. The question for you was, and just asking for your commentary on the images that might be in Islamic literature or from speech or Islamic speech that we have either in our masajids or in our communities. Do you see anything there that also kind of points to potential racism, whether it be in our Arab communities or South Asian communities, in the imagery and the way stories are told there?
I think that everyone has the potential of having racist notions, different ideas, even amongst Muslims. However, in our religion, if we keep our eye on the prize, which is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we always have that that particular force drawing us towards what is right. If we read what the Prophet said regarding these things, then if we're really Muslims, then we have to submit. When we have differences, we have problems, we refer to Allah and His Messenger. And for example, if someone is perceived as being a racist or something, we can go to that Muslim in our own society and we can say, don't forget, brother, what the Prophet said in his farewell address, that there's no superiority over an Arab over a non-Arab, over a non-Arab over an Arab, over a black over white, or white over black, and that our the best of you is he who has the taqwa, okay, who's in other words, it's inside, and Muslims should respond to that. In a situation where you're not dealing with people who have that kind of a resource, I would say, to go to, that is clear. It is absolutely clear what the Prophet has said. It is short, it is crisp, it is clear, and we can't go wrong. But then if you go to another route, okay, which is that of what I would call the Church of the Christian West, they have another perception that that we don't share, and that we have to change the perception. And how will we do that? As Muslims, we would do it through wisdom and excellent preaching. And so we have to be very skillful. I think that everybody has that potential, but I think that in Al-Islam that we are leaning towards obeying what is right, obeying what is ordained by Allah. I'm not sure if I answered your question clearly or satisfactorily.
You did. Thank you very much, Imam, for that answer. Okay, the next questions I'm going to. This one is for Zachary King. Zachary, I'm going to give you 2 questions. I'll combine them, and hopefully you can answer them both for us. And the first one was, could you offer some advice about some practical ways to channel the energy of African American youth and connecting them from youth in other communities like suburban and urban communities? And the second question, can you give us some names of organizations in Newark that we could possibly get involved in?
All right, Bismillah. So I think that some of those are easier to answer than others. I would say that, like, my starter thoughts are, number one, I think there's a lot of places where the deen intersects and helps bring people together. So, you know, the 3 things that exist inside the Sunnah are, you know, learning how to swim, bow and arrow, and riding horses. And if you really think about it, there's a place where that connects people inside of nature. And there's something where it also, you know, you kind of like have a space where people are out in nature, people are together, and it's almost like a camp experience. I think that that's a really great place to cause a good intersection between different groups of people, urban and suburban Muslims. I think it's a place where people can especially relate. I mean, my own children went to a camp in, I think, New Hampshire for 2 weeks, and it was very holistic. They couldn't use cell phones. We had to write them letters. It was just, but they really got a chance to get away from separate genders. It sounded like it was a pretty amazing experience that my children were able to have. And these are the type of things that Muslims coming together, it would also create a space to be able to have other conversations watch documentaries and some of these things that would help them understand these deeper topics, because you're kind of away and you're in a freer space, and therefore you're in a freer mindset. You're able to have these conversations in a way that can be extremely powerful. The other thing I would say is volunteerism. Like, you know, in the case of me taking my children with me when I went to a food pantry or a soup kitchen, when I was working in for NJ Snap, it was an opportunity for my children to be able to engage not only with what dad was doing, but also engage and connect with the community. It gives them a different sense. That also evens the playing ground in some ways, as far as you're serving the people who are in a certain level of need. It creates another level of appreciation. I would say that that's the other one. And the last one I would say has to be something that would be designed. You'd have to, one of the most powerful things that are missing is like a place where there's a real tutorial after school program that's really robust. The after school programs that exist, especially in urban community, are very more like just watching a child at that point in time, at that moment. It's really not something that provides a real substance that helps students close the gap educationally, that helps people really talk about what they're dealing with. These are places where Muslims could create a program that connects mentorship and tutorial and be a source of dawah without even saying anything about something super religious. It just would be the space that would really create the food that would be real, that they would be able to eat, the opportunity for somebody to just be like, this person who's tutoring me in this math, they'll just mention something and it would just open up another opportunity for people across the table to relate, have a discussion, and connect. As far as the other aspect of what organizations exist, I mean, listen, you have Imam Daud on the line. I mean, I want to say maybe 5 to 7 years back, Nia was one of 5 houses of worship that was connected and doing some profound work in the community, because they are a community that does food deliveries, and they go to the train station and they give out meals to people. So Nia would be the first place to start. Let's just start at home in this conversation. But I also encourage what Tariq Amir said, like that we need to circle back to that. He said that only one brother ever showed up and nobody returned. Well, there it is right there in Essex County. It's a place to be able to go connect and be able to visit some prisoners and have some conversations as far as that's concerned. And then the last one is I'm impartial to, the school that I used to work at. There's an all boys public school that exists in Newark on Chancellor Avenue, inside of Weequay High School in the Weequay section of Newark. It's called Eagle Academy. You have gentlemen from 6th grade through 12th grade, just really needing to be able to connect with other people as far as careers, opportunities, and be able to get into the community. It would be a great chance to be able to connect with individuals, of which the good number of those people have Muslim people in their family, and there's like 3 masjids on the street, of which Masjid Ibrahim, Baitul Haqq is on the street. I mean, those are other masjids or places to be able to connect. And Allah knows best.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Brother Zachary. We have one last question, and it is for Imam Daud. And we're also going to have, we'll ask you, Imam Daud, if when you're finished with the answer, if you can please close us out with a dua. I just want to thank everybody for listening, and definitely thank our panelists. You guys were amazing, and this really was an amazing event. And I want to thank all of you for your time today. So thank you very much on behalf of our whole community, and we look forward to working with all of you to really resolve these issues and continue this discussion to try to get to a better place. Imam Daud, the last question for you just came in. The question is asking that there are some people who maybe are misunderstanding the Medina experience, and they believe that after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death, that the immigrants were the ones who took over. So therefore, the immigrants should be the ones leading. And they're asking for your commentary on that. And then inshallah, when you're done, please close us out with a dua. Imam Daud.
Hassan, thanks for having us. It was really a great session, and we pray we continue in such. The Medinian society, if we understand that it was no longer in the Medinian, once the Prophet ﷺ once the Prophet established the Medinan society, the Medinan society consisted or made up of immigrants and residents or locals. What Rasulullah was able to do was to fashion an Islamic society out of these elements. That's why we talk about the synergistic energy that the synergy that he created by bringing these different elements together, the cooperation of these different peoples or different groups together, and that was able to affect that much greater change than any one group could have done on its own. So after the death of the Prophet, it was no longer Muhajirin and Ansar. It was after the death of during the time of the Prophet, the Prophet bridged the gap. So, and anyone, if you remember the incident where there was a misunderstanding taking place in the marketplace, and some of the two young people, one from the Ansar, one from the Muhajirin, they had a dispute and it broke down into a little fight. And this one, the Muhajirin, yeah, Muhajiri, come and help me. Yeah, Ansari, come and help. And this what was going on. And the word reached the Prophet. The Prophet was very particular to deal with issues like that. He leave whatever he's doing, he's going to come and deal with it. And he came right over to my friend. He says, are you going back to Jahiliyyah while I am still among your present in your midst? That is Jahiliyyah. You're going back to Jahiliyyah. You're creating partisanship. So it was a group. So it was not when Abu Bakr took over. Abu Bakr took over not because he was a Muhajiri. Abu Bakr took over, was given leadership because he was the most experienced. He's the one who had this personal connection with the Prophet, special connection that nobody else had. He was the one who was in the cave of Thur with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You know, so and had special connection, a special time with him, and so he had, and the Prophet says he was the most beloved of all the men of his group to him. So it was everybody accepted him, and so it was like that. So it was not because of him being a muhajir; it was because of his commitment and connection to the Prophet and to Islam and stuff, and what he brought to the table. Basically, it was like that. Because in the community, you can always choose the best in the community. That's how it was. So it didn't go back to how it was before, how it started. And so we need to go on in that manner. May Allah make it easy for us. We seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness and his mercy. رَبَّنَا آتَنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ وَادْخِلْنَا الْجَنَّةَ مَعَ الْأَبْرَارِ يَا عَزِيزُ يَا غَفَّارُ يَا رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you all again. That's the end of our program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh.